word why. What a curious word. The kind of word that can make us cringe, feel defensive, or even distant. But you know, sometimes why is the key. The key that can unlock so much to our lives. Join me as we explore the why with fascinating contributors to the world. Those that entertain us, inform us, teach us about life, and if we're lucky, inspire the next in all of us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and welcome to Headroom, a production of Rainlight and co-produced by Old Soul. Let's go. All right, let's go down a few rabbit holes today on the podcast. Let's talk to an author, someone that I've known in a context based in education, but I think we're going to expand that conversation today. I'm going to be speaking today with Pete Hall, the author of Chasing the Show. By the way, great title, Pete. I love that because in a fast-paced world, we're always chasing something. So why not chase the show? Let's talk about that right out of the gate. Tell me about the title, Chasing the Show.
Oh, well, first off, thanks for having me, Rod. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to see you again after it's been a little while. So it's good to see you.
It's been a hot minute.
It's been a hot minute. Exactly. Well, the title of the book, Chasing the Show, is actually the third iteration. It was the third title. I had two different working titles as I was working on this project, and I arrived at Chasing the Show. The show is a term that we use to describe Major League Baseball. So the book is purportedly about a young man who believes he's going to be a professional athlete. In particular, he's going to be a pro baseball player. And it follows the ups and downs of that dream. So as he's pursuing that dream, he is in effect chasing the show. And like you said, we're all chasing something. We've all got something on our minds, right? We've all got a goal, an ambition, a purpose, or something that is calling to us. And that's what this is all about.
Why sports is the backdrop? And it's not a loaded question because I said off air, anybody who knows me, I am a sports fanatic. I think that's even just a fair way to put it. I'm going to put you in the same category after reading the book, just in, the acknowledgments of past and present, baseball, just Hall of Famers and just personalities and how this young man and these kids think about, maybe it's the Red Sox and standing a certain way in the box and that, but I think sports is a fantastic backdrop to this because it right now may be one of the few things that actually unites kids together with adults in an experience where you can actually share in the outcome in a very different way than you can in a classroom. So talk a little bit about the choice, because I think I'm going to make a guess, that was a choice that you made, that the lessons you wanted to sort of walk us through would be best served within the context of athletics.
Yeah. And so, there's two things embedded in that question. One is that there's lessons embedded in the story. And so as an educator, and as you know, I was a teacher, I was a principal, I can't just write a novel that just tells a story. I want to have it teach something. There's got to be lessons engaged there. And so there are lessons, there are talking points for kids, for teachers, for coaches. And the reason that we use sports as a backdrop for this is because sports is the metaphor for life. If there's one thing that's kind of encapsulates all of the essence of our lives, sports kind of does that. It provides us an opportunity to strive for individual greatness as well as the collective good. It gives us an opportunity to, one way or another, keep score and keep track of things in our heads. And it is an opportunity for us to learn and grow so many powerful life lessons that extend beyond the field or the court or the pitch or whatever the context of the sport is. So while this is, if you glance at it, you look at, it's a baseball book. It's not really a baseball book. It's a book about growing up. It's a book about goals. It's about life. It's about how adults can help kids navigate that treacherous journey for those precious developmental years in the teenage domain. So we found that, having sports as a backdrop is something that really is kind of relatable to most of us, not everyone, but to most of us.
Let's talk about sports in today's day, 2022, and to get an idea of the impact on the young person. So so Anthony Sumner, the lead character in the book, and so we'll talk a little bit about him. But I want to sort of extend beyond what we just chatted about and talk about how sports has changed since you and I were young, whether that's a good thing and anything that we can extrapolate and potentially make better as we think about how much we are using sports as a crutch in an increasingly divided society that we have. Not to mention hybrid learning and kids not in classrooms and all kinds of variables that continue to change. It feels like on a moment by moment basis. I think when we were growing up, and people who are into sports will get this. I think a lot of times whether you're judging, it doesn't matter. Football, baseball, basketball, it doesn't matter. There's that notion of, gosh, the referees, we want them there, we need them there, but we don't want them to be a part of the game, right? They should be in the background. And if we're talking about them, that means they made themselves a part of the game. Now, I'm using that to say it does feel like we are in such a competitive world right now in chasing things, and especially in sort of typical suburbia, that it feels like we've shifted a little bit. And I'm wondering about the pressures on young people, because we talk about referees. Now I think we've got parents, we have organizers of sports and leagues that are making themselves increasingly more a part of the narrative than even the kids on the court, on the field, than they ever have before. And I'm wondering how that impacts an Anthony Sumner or the Pete Halls or the Rod Bergers of the world that are sitting there wondering, I keep hearing about this thing from my parents about burnout. I wonder what that is. And do we run the risk of negatively impacting such an awesome, to use the book like a backdrop to learn life lessons?
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up and a great question. The thing that I have found, it's the Pete Halls and the Rod Bergers and our children. That's who we're really mostly concerned about, right? It's the young people and how they're growing up. And I think that one of the things as more and more people get involved in that world of sports, and you just think about the clubs and the travel teams and all the pressure that gets put on kids to hyper focus on one sport, and this is your path and this is your opportunity, really is part of why I wrote this book in the first place, was to provide a lens for having the conversation between adults and kids and between adults and adults. So the main character, Anthony Sumner's parents, have a friend who's a counselor, and they engage in some dialogue informally to talk about, well, how do we parent our kid who thinks he's going to be a pro athlete when the odds are so astronomically stacked against him, right? I mean, so few. I think it's 1 out of 2,000 kids who play in a high school organized sport make it professionally to some level, just any level of professional performance. And so the odds are really stacked against the tremendous majority of our kids. So what we're trying to do is be able to talk about what's plan B. What else is there beyond this? And we want to nurture that goal. We want to nurture that dream. We want to be there and be completely supportive. And we want to make sure that we don't overlook other possibilities too. So how do we have that conversation? What does that sound like? Who brings it up? And there's one scene in the book that I personally like a lot, is a scene in which the dad wants to talk to Anthony about something serious. And he knows that you got to get your hands dirty so you can free up your minds while you're having a conversation. So he has this whole elaborate ruse set up where he says, son, come help me fix the refrigerator. And there's nothing wrong with the refrigerator, but he keeps fussing with stuff while they're talking. So they're able to actually have a productive conversation. It's a neat lesson. It's a lesson that I got from my folks, and I wanted to pass that along in a meaningful way. And back to your conversation about, referees and folks interfering and getting in the middle of it. They cloud the issue, right? When that happens. And the issue is about, how are we growing up? What kind of lessons are we learning? How are we determining what's best for me and what's best for the team? And one of the things also that, I wanted to address in this is that idea of, as coaches, as parents, we want to get the collective good and we want to address what's best for the individual. And I think a lot of times we forget one or the other. So parents maybe forget that it's about the team's success and it's about learning how to be a part of a team, and it's learning about how to contribute and what's your value and what's your avenue in. And we think it's just about the kid. And a lot of times as coaches, it's about the wins and losses. It's about the program. And it's not about developing the young person to be the best young person that he or she can be. So I tried to bring in those in a compelling, interesting story.
I'm glad you brought in the role of the parent. Um, that's what I was wrestling with this book, which is a good thing because it made me think about it, which was, in a way, look, I think we like to organize things as human beings. We like to put things on a shelf. Whether it's a refrigerator or a garage or whatever we're doing. And so, in essence, if I have to say, where am I putting Chasing the Show and who should be reading it? I have to be honest. I think to myself, do I give it to my assistant coach and I coach my 9-year-old's basketball team? Do I give it to the parent that is non-responsive to emails about things pertaining to their child within the context of the sport? Because I think it's important just in supporting that young person and their commitment, their understanding of what it means to be a part of a team. Is it a teenager that I'm mentoring that is very, very close to failing out of high school? Because even though he's not an athlete, there are lessons that he can pull from that give him an idea around just how complex and how beautiful the world can be as long as you sort of raise your hand and say, yes, I want to participate, right? And so choosing that audience, and I'm wondering from the parent side of it, look, there's so much, of course, COVID and a pandemic. I mean, it threw us in a tailspin that I don't think we'll ever, you and I may be incredibly old when we start to understand the impacts. But I think one thing it did, which was interesting, and hopefully we can learn from this, is it actually drew our attention as parents, as adults, to what our kids are doing during the day when we don't see them, as simplistic as that sounds. And that's caused uproar. That's caused challenges in sort of parent-teacher relationships, what to convey, what not, how to have a relationship that is productive but not obstructive. And I'm wondering how we think about it in the context of an Anthony. There's what's it, maybe chapter 47, 48, they're going to the All-Star game and it's the drive back and the parents kind of have this just general conversation on how he thought that he did that day. Right. And he kind of gives the just standard answer and sort of plugs in his headphones and he's sort of on to the next. And I'm just wondering what's going through those parents, their minds, when you're writing that, when you're thinking about it, as to, in essence, how much should they be leaning in? Just like in academics, how much should we be leaning in? And are there lessons to be learned from what we've experienced through schools that we can take as parents to the athletic field that can benefit the young person? Because I find as a coach, there are, it's not even 50-50. It's like 20% of the parents, I think, have a pretty solid understanding of the role this team can play in this kid's growth and experience as a third grader. But I think that the other 80%, not that they don't want to, but they're in the dark. It's almost like a language they don't know. And they're sort of handing them off. It's like, you hold the baby. No, you hold the baby. Right. So talk a little bit about it from the context of Anthony's parents and what we think we can do based on the challenges we've been facing in our schools across the country.
Well, I think it's really important that we even broaden it beyond sports. So whether sports, music, clubs, activities like hunting, fishing, playing Dungeons and Dragons, whatever it is, when there are those passions and those things that we do collaboratively with others, there are lessons there. There's lessons in success. There's lessons in failure. There's lessons in struggle. There's lessons in developing and getting better at something and dedicating yourself to something. And as older people who have been through the fire, Rod, you and I can look at 9-year-olds and we can already say, all right, you're probably not even going to make the varsity high school team based on your skill level right now. However, there are lessons there and there are things that we want you to learn as you grow up. And I think that's the element of parenting, coaching, teaching, counseling, mentoring, you name it, that we want to be intentional about. And so often, like you said, parents hand off kids to the school, parents hand off kids to the coaches, and then simultaneously, schools send kids home. They're like, oh, now that's yours now. And as coaches, we say, okay, practice is over, go home. And we want to make sure that there's collaboration and communication, and there's opportunities for us to be on the same page, as it were, as far as, well, how are we developing these young people? How are we raising them together? And we do have that responsibility that we share. And when kids are engaged in multiple activities and they're around multiple grownups, it makes sense if the grownups would have some kind of communication and or some kind of basis upon which they interact with kids and lead kids and work with these young people. So I think it's critical. I think it's something that I know in my own experience growing up, I don't think my folks talked a lot to my coaches and to my teachers at school. I think that I tried to with my kids. I mean, my son played soccer. My first daughter was in gymnastics. My second daughter rode horses. So I tried to have some kind of contact and communication with the adults in their lives. And I tried to connect with school people. Being a principal, that kind of affects things. When I go and have a conversation with somebody else's teacher, I'm like, well, tell me about how my kid's doing at school. And they're like, are you coming to me as a principal or as a parent? And nevertheless, I think it's an important conversation for us to continue to have. And so part of this was to create that conversation piece. This book is intended to be that conversation piece that when you're thinking about where is it on the shelf, I think it's on the coffee table, and someone looks at it and says, well, what is this? What's going on in here? And then we talk through it.
Headroom is produced by Old Soul, a one-stop marketing agency that understands the power of brand and nuance. Reach out to my guy Matt at Old Soul and supercharge your brand and content strategy. That's Old Soul. Shoot Matt a note at aoldsoul.com. That's AOLDSOUL.com. And now, back to our guest. Yeah, because there's such meaning, I think, in so many people's lives as adults when they think about sports. I'll share a quick story. This past weekend, our team was down an incredibly amount of points. It was not looking good at halftime. And for whatever reason, and I am a believer in sport. That's just what's in my DNA. I looked at these 9-year-olds and I said, who wants to climb a mountain with me? Right. And all these kids said, I want to climb a mountain, because I just knew I got to get them motivated to sort of chip away. And we ended up winning. And it was such an incredible moment. And the kids were crying at the end because they had achieved something. They had not only had they scored the points, but they'd played the defense, and kids who normally weren't very active were very active. And then I talked to one of my best friends later that day, and he's in his mid-50s, and he immediately, Pete, referenced an experience he had in Little League that, the way he described it, it was like he was Anthony Sumner at the All-Star game. It was just like yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a reason why elementary kids, when you say, how was your day? And they say, oh, I had PE, it was great. There's something when you combine physical activity and other friends that elicits just an entirely different experience. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but to me, like that's sort of that golden nugget, right? Which is, how do you help the Anthonys of the world understand the realities of chasing the show while not diminishing their spirit, right? But also propping them up to find other areas of life where they can experience those challenges and those highs and lows.
Yeah.
And also be not comfortable, maybe is the wrong word, but I don't know, maybe that is the word. Maybe you've got a better word, but the visceral reaction that people have in understanding, some might equate it to finding love, right? When they're young and that kind of a thing, or a career.
Well, I think what you're referring to is that intense emotional experience. So Rod, that's just good coaching. From last week. That's
from
all
coach to coach.
That's just really good coaching. And the other piece of it is, the kids experience intense emotion with that event. And they've been playing basketball all season, and they've had practices, and they've had games, and they've had conversations with their friends and their parents, and they've played at the playground at school, et cetera, et cetera. And that has probably all been positive and good. And there's a lot of different things accompanying that. What you're talking about is that intense moment where they feel those emotions really strongly. And that will last. And we don't know, as grownups, we don't know what those intense moments are for each of our kids, our children, our students, our players on the team, the kids in the club, whatever it might be. We don't necessarily know. We don't know what comment we make. We don't know what experience, what match, what game, what event is the one that they will hang on to till their mid-50s and then be able to reflect back on it like it was yesterday. So the key for us as grownups, I think, is to handle all those moments as if maybe this is the moment that this kid's going to hang on to forever. And if we treat it with that kind of respect and that kind of sanctity, I think that directs our involvement with the kid. It directs how we say what we say. It directs our body language and our facial expressions. Because it's those, and I can tell you, I've got moments from growing up as a kid that there's some grownups that I will never forgive for some of the things they said to me, on the court or in the hallway or in the classroom. And there are adults that said things that I guarantee they don't even remember. And I remember their face, their smile, the way, they sit with us. Those intense emotional moments sit with us. So as coaches, as parents, as educators, we need to be cognizant of the fact that this could be a moment for somebody. And we just want to make sure that we're at our very best so that we can support our kids to be the amazing, incredible people they are, whether they're athletes or astronauts or attorneys or whatever it might be.
Tell me about the writing process. I have a belief that whether you're writing an article or a book or a short story, or maybe even composing an email that is incredibly intense, right? Sort of going back to those intense moments, that you almost develop a relationship with words, and those words become characters. And I'm wondering how much Pete Hall is in Anthony Sumner, and what was the relationship like as you were writing? And not that you could maybe quantify it, but you were on a string. It felt like you knew the next line coming. You kind of could forecast out where this was going. Talk a little bit about your relationship with the character of Anthony.
Yeah, well, a lesson I learned from Stephen King back in the day is that authors write about what they know. So yes, I had my experiences growing up, and it took me 30 years to write this book. From the time that I was about Anthony's age, in a pretty similar type of situation where, I had some illusions of grandeur, right? That I was going someplace with my skills. From that point to the point that I am now 50 years old, and the current light at the end of the tunnel is I'm competing in the senior games in Fort Lauderdale. I'm competing in the long jump in May. So,
which it's got to be in Fort Lauderdale. I mean, what?
Right. Right.
Sounds like a Seinfeld episode.
Yeah. Well, and the point of that is that things do shift. And so now I've got this new passion, this new thing that I'm chasing, and something that's exciting for me. And it took 30 years to write it. And there are a handful of those moments that I was referring to earlier, those intense emotional moments in the book, that some of them are based loosely on actual events. Some of them are completely fabricated, and some of them are almost word for word how they played out. And by the way, that was really fun to write like that, and then give a copy to my dad and give a copy to my mom and be like, you figure out which ones were real, which ones are not. How's your memory? I mean, what do you think? So that's all my personal thing, bunch of personal Easter eggs in there. But yeah, there are moments that I'm writing and I get so lost enmeshed in the writing that I'm like, I feel like I'm Anthony. I feel like I'm a part of it as an author. And then that's what we refer to that as flow, right? Where you get in that flow, it all is just coming together. And then it kind of makes you wonder when you sit back and look, like, if you were in the flow, then why did it take you 30 years to finish this thing? Come on, man. So, it actually took the pandemic for me to have the time to set aside the time to take the draft and the ideas and the general scope and sequence of the story and weave the lessons in and make it meaningful and make it intentional. And I'm really pleased with the outcome. I keep referring to over here. It's sitting over here. That's what I'm looking at.
It needs to be by your side at all times.
What's that?
It needs to be by your side at all times.
Yeah, well, I like to think so. I think so. Absolutely.
If you sit back and you look at it and you say, gosh, what if you played this out? Like what would be the next in a series of Chasing the Show? And when it comes to Anthony, how do you think it plays out? And, or if you would have read this book when you were 20, and or sort of thought about those lessons, because I think sometimes we experience life through happy accidents, right? There's a reason why we make a left turn, or we attend a meeting, or we accept a phone call, and it's all of a sudden it's an incredibly, whether it's the butterfly effect, however you want to conceptualize it. Life is beautiful in its twists and turns. And sometimes it's a book. Sometimes it's a movie. Sometimes it's a young person watching Good Will Hunting, right? Or a Shawshank, or some of these classics, especially from the male side of the conversation. So how do you think about this book in your own life, and how it might have some of the lessons or some of the paths that it went down might have either impacted you, or that you would have maybe glossed over because you were 20 and you sort of knew better?
Yeah. I wish I'd had it when I was 15. I wish I could have
Why
read it.
15?
Well, 15, in the starting high school, trying to figure out exactly where I'm going to go with my life, what I was going to do, what I was going to focus on, and not really dedicating myself out loud, but not as much internally towards goals. And it's excruciating some of the decisions that the protagonist makes in our story. I mean, some of the things that he decides to do, you're just shaking your head, you're like, dude, why would you do that? Why would you, what are you doing? And what's the expression? If I'd have known then what I know now, right? And that's another reason why I wrote it, is I wanted to put some of these lessons out there. And I know that lots of kids look at us as older people like, you don't know. Who are you? How could you possibly know? But the life lessons and the advice and the guidance and the journey is not that different, from generation to generation. It's not, the tools and the technology and the approaches and the accessibility to things, that's changed. There's some things that have changed, but for the most part, growing up is not that different. So the lessons, I believe, are timeless. And I wish I'd have had them at 15, so I could have had somebody help, screw my head on a little bit straighter. I think things have gone okay in my life. I'm not going to complain about anything. And as far as what's Anthony's next step, I've actually thought about that because I have read Stephen King's stuff and I'm a huge fan of his work. And we do write what we know. So I think at some point in Anthony's career, he's going to be a school principal. And what I would like to do is actually write a kind of a thriller next. That's the next thing, is Anthony's involved in some kind of thriller. And I have an idea. I haven't yet put pen to paper on it, so you're gonna have to stay tuned for that one. But Anthony's gonna have a pretty interesting grown-up life next.
Well, I like the teaser there. And hey, we've got the scary notion of the big quit with all these educators talking about leaving. So there are a lot of storylines I think that you could probably go down, especially if you started putting pen to paper now.
Right.
Pete, let's close with this. Talk about just how you have changed. And I know this is a podcast, and so they're listening to our voices, but there's a great sense of pride that I can just see through the video that you've got with this book, right? And that I think that's an awesome experience, right? And to be able to know that you've put your time into it and that it's had that kind of an impact. Because I find so many times people write and they almost feel so distanced from it because it changes over and over and over again. You finally look at it and you say, I guess that's what I wrote, but
right.
You know what I mean? Once you kind of get into the editing, it becomes a very different dish than what you started with when you walked into the kitchen. And so how has this changed you? I don't get a sense from the years that I've known you that you're somebody that lives in a space of regret or perceived regret about the decisions that you make. And so I would think that this has had a very profound impact on you, but correct me if I'm wrong and kind of let the audience know just what this has been. Has it been cathartic? Has it been inspirational? Like, where does it land for you now that it's done and you've got the jacket here and you're all good to go?
Yeah, actually, cathartic is a word that I've used often to describe the impact that this had. It did quite a bit for me to process some of my own decision making and some of my own growing up and the twists and turns that my life have taken. That I've come to grips a little bit better with exactly how things have played out, and I'm extremely happy. I'm married, 3 kids. We got a good thing going. I was a school principal, and now I work with businesses and with schools, and I did quite a bit of writing educationally prior to this. So leadership guides, books for teachers, things like that have an impact, and I'm super proud of the impact and the influence I've been able to have in that education world. And this project is something that has really been something I'm really, really proud of, because I think it's an entertaining story. If you just want to pick up a book and read an entertaining story, I think it's an entertaining story. We think a lot about how, stories have the Hollywood ending. And this maybe doesn't have the classic Hollywood ending. It maybe has a feel-good ending, and it might not be exactly what the reader thinks it's going to be. But I'm really proud of it because it does tell a good story. And I do believe that it is an important and helpful book for young people growing up and trying to navigate the path, and for grown-ups, coaches, parents, teachers, who have kids in front of them that are struggling, trying to find their direction, trying to find their passion. And we as grownups don't always know what to say, how to say it. So this gives good examples and counterexamples of how to do that. And by the way, and I don't know if you know this, Rod, that there are online study guides that we make, discussion guides. Let me paraphrase.
They are discussion guides. I have looked at them. So yes, I would.
Yeah. So they're just designed to be kind of like book clubs. So I intentionally did not write lesson plans or anything like that, but I did write book club-esque discussion guides. So questions, prompts for young people, and then prompts for the not so young people that are reading the book to engage in some dialogue together. And I have gotten really good feedback from folks that that's been really helpful as far as being able to set the stage and engage in some dialogue with folks. So I'm thrilled to death. Proud is the word. I think more than anything else, I'm really proud of this.
Yeah. And I would say, to use baseball as the analogy, I mean, it's not that you hit a home run, and I enjoyed the book immensely, but I would say you actually earned it. So it's more, it's kind of like Anthony, slapping a double, right? And stealing, third. I mean, you're kind of walking through that process. And I think that's something to be celebrated now is, can we support, value, and promote the process for the young and the wise in that regard? Where can people go to not only connect with you, social media, and I'm sure they can get the book sort of wherever books are sold? Is that fair?
I would hope so. It's obviously online, various places. If you go to our website that we created for the book, where the discussion guides are, and there's blogs and some other stuff, there's even a 2 truths and a lie about the author. So if you're really curious to know about this Pete Hall guy, you could look that up. Chasingtheshow.com is the website. And I do have the ISBN number. So if you wanted to shop local, you could always search by ISBN number. Maybe you could find it there if you wanted to stay away from the big box retailers. But yeah, it's up, it's open, it's out there. And I encourage folks to give it a shot.
Well, keep up the good fight, Pete. You're always not only a good sport to have a deep conversation, but you continue to add, I think, thoughtful teachings that we can all learn from. We want to thank Pete Hall, author of Chasing the Show, who Jason Quick of The Athletic said is professionally honest, a captivating medley of sports, love, and life. I think he captured that quite well. Pete, we want to thank you. Thanks so much to Pete Hall, chasingtheshow.com.
Thanks, Rod. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Thanks for taking the plunge into Headroom, where we uncover the why behind the what and who impacting our lives. Headroom is a production of Rainlight and co-produced by our friends at Old Soul. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and this is Headroom.